Welcome to TYT Interviews. We got another great interview with another former Baltimore police officer now, Joe Crystal. He's also been in the news, and there was a famous situation where he was actually a good cop and turning people who were doing things wrong in the police department, and obviously that got him in a world of trouble. Now, that's back when he was in Baltimore. He's no longer in Baltimore because of that, and he joins us from Florida right now. Joe, welcome to the Young Turks.
Thank you so much for having me, sir. I'm really honored to be on your show.
We did the story of your bravery in Baltimore earlier on the program, and now this is back in 2011. But before we get to that, I want to go back a little bit more to how you grew up, because it's obvious that you know, I know you became a cop, but you've been against cops your whole life, isn't it, Joe?
No, not at all. I come from a family of cops. Both my parents were New York City cops. It's actually where they met. My parents probably had nothing in common, and probably what led to them separating when I got older. But the one thing they had in common was the job. And I was basically raised around cops. It's all I ever wanted to do, all I could ever think about doing. Most kids grow up and their favorite show is some Disney movie. I grew up watching cop movies and cop shows, and it's all I ever wanted to do. I thought it was the best way to be able to help people.
Oh, that's what your problem is. Because in those cop shows, they say, like, freeze, you're under arrest, and they give somebody a moment before they pummel them or shoot them. That's not what cops do these days. So I think that's where you were misled and led astray. Okay, so now I'm sure, though, that you're not a patriot since you turned on your fellow cops and reported their illegal activities. It's not like you would have volunteered at Ground Zero on the day after September 11th, right?
No, I did that the day of September 11th. I graduated boot camp September 8th. I'm from New Jersey, so I was in New Jersey when September 11th happened. And I volunteered to go in right same day, September 11th, sometime that early afternoon, if I remember correctly. I had my father drop me off at the military base there, and I went there for about a week and a half.
Now, okay, I hear you on that, but there's no way you did well in training. I mean, you couldn't have possibly gotten an award when you were training to become a cop in Baltimore, right?
No, I was put in charge of my class after the first day, as they call the quote-unquote class commander, in charge of like 60-something recruits. And at the end of the academy, you get awards, and I got what was called the Commissioner Award at the time. It was for the trainee that demonstrated the most leadership. And I was honored to get that award from, at the time, Commissioner Fred Bielefeld. And it was a great start to my career. I was lucky and blessed and humbled to receive it.
Okay, so obviously, as the audience can tell, I'm giving your background because you're not anti-cop. I mean, you wanted to be a cop your whole life, right? And you're trying to do the right thing here. So now, before we get to the incident in 2011, I am curious about when you went into the police force, what was your outlook? I mean, did you think that cops generally trying to do the right thing here and solve crime, et cetera? Did you have some sense? I mean, I, as an outsider, have some sense that, hey, these guys are going to cover for each other. At some point, they're going to have to make quota on arrests, and they're going to cut a couple of corners. Like, that's what I would have thought. Did you not think that? What was your mindset?
I'm not going to say maybe I didn't think that, but I think that I thought, you know, in any profession, there's going to be bad people in anything, doctors, lawyers, anything. You know, there's news reporters that people tell you never talk to them because you can't trust them, certain guys. And I think that it's just, to me at least, it was more a matter of, I thought there were certain people that were going to be like that, but I thought the majority were going to be good. And even after everything that happened to me, I still believe that, you know, the majority of officers are good and have good intentions. I think that even in Baltimore, more or less kind of what happened was that cops were afraid to come forward as a result of something like what they saw happen to me. And until we repair that, it's going to give all cops a bad name.
Okay, so then let's go to that event, and then I want to come back and discuss police culture a little bit more. So now it's 2011. You guys wind up arresting this guy who had broken into some homes, and Antoine Green. He appeared to toss some drugs on the ground and ran. Okay, so far normal story. What happened next?
Well, like I said, the saddest thing of this whole story was I was actually supposed to be off that day. So if there's one thing about this whole thing that always kind of not cracks me up was I was supposed to have gone home. There was a detective in our squad. I don't know if you ever watched The Wire or anything like that.
Yep.
if you ever saw The Wire, there was like that character Presbeluski, whose father-in-law was a major and stuff like that.
Yep.
Well, I worked with like the real life Presbeluski. His father used to be the major of internal affairs. This guy couldn't find drugs in a Rite Aid, and, I was told, I know you already basically worked your time that day, but you can't go home until we get this detective an arrest. So that's the funniest part, and I always kind of try to share that story just to give it a little bit of a sense of humor on the story. So we see this guy selling drugs on the street, clear as day. He throws the drugs, he runs. He ends up kicking in the back door of a home he thinks is vacant. Come to find out, it's a girlfriend of an off-duty cop's home. And he gets caught and arrested. I mean, to be honest, it was a normal that type of thing happens all the time. That's not a crazy thing. That's not a crazy day. I probably wouldn't even have gone home and told my wife the story because it's happened. Stuff like that's happened a bunch of times.
Yep.
So they placed the man in that transport wagon. I know everybody following Freddie Gray. Everybody knows what the paddy wagon is now. And at the time, another person, he's not wearing a uniform, didn't identify himself. He's talking to the sergeant. And I'm not paying attention. I'm thinking to myself, well, great, we got this guy in arrest. I'll be home because I had to get up the next morning at 3 a.m. anyway. So I hear them talking, and I see the sergeant, shake his head in, an affirmative way. And he says, all right, I'll take care of it. And he gets on the radio and he says, hey, his call number was 4980. He says, hey, 4980, have that wagon 10-6, bring the prisoner back. And at the time, I didn't think anything of it. I'm thinking to myself, look, man, you don't have a lot of experience. There's probably something going on that you're not even aware of type of thing. Coming from the military, you're always taught not to question your supervisors. So at that time, they go get the guy, and as they're taking the guy out of the wagon, the guy kind of starts to buck, and he kind of starts, saying, hey, get so-and-so, they're going to beat me up and this and that. And to my own ignorance, probably, I didn't think anything of it because there's certain people that have those reputations that if they were doing that, I would have been like, oh, no way. That sergeant at the time didn't have that type of reputation. So I'm not really thinking anything of it. The guy gets brought into the house, and then he gets taken in the back, and you hear what happens. And when that happened, I felt like crap. There's no real way other to say it. I felt horrible about it. I felt like I was a part of it. To this day, I still rack my brain about, can I have done anything different about it? With the benefit of hindsight, yeah, I could have stopped the guy from ever going in the house, but I didn't have that benefit that night.
Wait, Joe, let me understand that better, right? So they bring the guy back into the house people who never read the story. Why? Why did they bring the guy back into the house?
My understanding is from what everything I've found out after the court trial and stuff like that was when I heard the off-duty officer say to the sergeant, speak to him, and he said, all right, I'll take care of it. I guess they wanted to bring him back to try to, what they would say, give him some quote-unquote act right, or basically teach him a lesson for breaking into the house of his girlfriend at the time.
So the cop who was off-duty had his girlfriend's house broken into. He's the one that we presume asked them to bring the guy back so they could teach him a lesson. Now, you're not going to break into my girlfriend's house. And now,
yes.
Of course, the guy didn't know he was breaking into the cop's girlfriend's house. So they bring him back.
Says that when I was there, when you hear the tussle going on, you hear the off-duty cop yell to him, she's got effing kids. And he says, I know, I said I was sorry. So, right away, that was like one of the first things I heard in the background that I even testified to hearing that, kind of exchange of words before like the rumblings and stuff like that.
So when you hear rumblings, okay, that they're kicking his ass.
I think my first instinct, to be honest, and I don't mean to curse, but my first instinct was, oh shit. And, at the time, I was the most junior guy on the scene, and it's one of those things. And I guess the easiest way I can explain it is it's one of those things that felt like it happened so quickly. Like as I'm processing what's going on, at the same time it's over.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Looking back now, it's like I know it was. If you asked me how long it was, I would probably tell you at that moment it felt like 2.5 seconds. Like, it felt so quick in my mind every time I think about it. But it's one of those things that I think, it went on. I know it went on longer than how it felt, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, I get it. So there's the off-duty guy who met you guys there, and then there was 2 cops with you, right? That were in the paddy wagon and then came back with you. Are both those guys in the house, or is one standing guard along with you?
Originally, it was myself, my sergeant, and the detective, like the Presbeluski detective.
Mm-hmm.
And then they called the wagon guy. So the wagon guy is usually a guy that goes off alone and does his thing. So at the time in the house, it was myself, the sergeant, the other detective, and the officer that drove the wagon.
So you and the officer who drove the wagon, you guys didn't do anything? It was just the sergeant and the off-duty cop?
Yeah, it was the sergeant and the off-duty cop, and it was myself, the wagon driver, and the other detective I was riding with in the vestibule area. And at the time, too, so many thoughts were going through my mind. That's a horrible block in Baltimore City. There's no street lights. The guy was yelling for help. I have all these thoughts in my head. Like, at the time, I'm thinking to myself, how are we going to get this guy out of here?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that could be an issue, too. Did the other 2 cops with you in the different room, not the room where they're assaulting the guy, did they do anything? Did they have any reaction, or did they look like that was the most normal thing they've ever seen?
To be honest, I think everybody was just confused. I never spoke to them about it. It was just one of those things that I think everybody was kind of confused in it. This isn't something that the sergeant didn't come to us and say, "Hey, look, this is what I have planned," or anything like that. I think everybody was kind of confused at the moment, and it's a matter of thinking about what could be happening back there that we're not seeing what's going on, and a matter of protecting ourselves from the crowd of people that's forming outside. So
when the suspect comes out, this was not a light assault, right? Any assault would be bad, but he came out in pretty bad shape, right? A broken ankle. What else?
His shirt was ripped open. I didn't see, any damage to his face, but it was obvious what happened. I mean, it was obvious to anybody, cop, citizen on the street, basically what had just transpired.
Right. Yeah, I think broken ankle is pretty severe in a situation like that. So, okay, you come back in. Do you report it immediately or no?
What happened was, as soon as I left that day, because like I said, as soon as we got this guy to arrest, I was good to go that day. So I call a sergeant that I know that works within the same division, and I tell him the full story, every detail, everything I can remember. Probably the freshest it was in my mind was at that time of telling that story. And I tell him what happened, and he tells me, well, you can't go to internal affairs. If you go to internal affairs, you're going to be, labeled a rat, and your career is going to be over. Just don't say anything. Keep your mouth shut. And, that's basically what I'm told when I speak to him. I didn't know if maybe he was going to try to report it himself or anything else like that. But, I tried right away that same day to report it to somebody.
Okay, but you didn't, in that case, you listened to his advice, I take it, and then you wound up talking to someone else, and that's when it came out. Who was that other person, and how did all this come out finally, where you wound up reporting it?
I went the route of basically saying that, I tried to report the incident as an officer. I'm thinking to myself now, maybe let me try to go the route of reporting it almost as a private citizen. So I think it was like a Sunday I was off. My wife and I knew this one state attorney, and we were going out to brunch with her. And I basically told the state attorney, I said, listen, I need to tell you a story. And I started telling her the story. And she stops me in the middle telling her the story. And she says, listen, if you continue to tell me the story, I have an ethical obligation that I'm going to have to say something. I'm going to have to do something about it. If you don't want this to get out, keep your mouth shut. Basically, I mean, that wasn't her exact words, but for the most part, that's what she said. And I told her the story. I told her everything that happened, and that's ultimately how the situation got reported.
So when they go to investigate the situation, the cops wrote up the incident, of course, the 2 guys who did the beating, in a completely different way, right? What did they write in the police report as to why Green was, obviously physically confronted?
Well, the officer that I refer to here as the Presbalewski, he actually authored the report. And according to his report, he stated that the guy wanted to apologize to the woman whose house he broke into, so they brought him back into the house.
Yeah, that happens often. Yeah, when
Exactly.
when you got somebody in a paddy wagon and he's cuffed already, he says, "Oh, I do declare, can we turn around, and I'd really like to apologize to the woman whose house I, unceremoniously burst into."
Well, and I mean, not even to take, I mean, to even take it a step farther, if you had to call the wagon back to bring him back, how did you know the guy wanted to apologize in the first place?
Right,
You know,
and then why did they say that they had to assault him?
well, according to them, once he got in the house, the suspect became enraged and tried to jump at the off-duty officer and headbutt him. And he fell to the ground and started flaying around, and that's how his shirt got ripped and ultimately how he injured his ankle.
So he flew. Is he cuffed at the time?
Yes.
So he's cuffed. So he decided to fly into the officer's hands with his head. Oh, he's going to headbutt their fist. That's probably what happened. So, I mean, obviously that story is so ridiculous that that when you have another officer like yourself reporting it, they're going to be in some trouble, and they were, right? This went to court, and the off-duty officer, he got a little bit of jail time, didn't he?
The off-duty officer, he got, I think it was 45 days in jail. The sergeant, they gave him probation, and the officer who authored the fake report, he's still working there actually as a detective. Last I heard in the undercover narcotics unit there.
So if you hadn't reported it and Green had reported the suspect, no way in the world they believe him, right? No, the other officer Williams is not going to get 45 days in jail based on Green's statement.
I don't believe so. If Green came forward by himself with no other witnesses, nothing else like that, I don't see how anything really ever comes of it.
So what's your, before we get to the repercussions now, what was your final analysis of how that went down? I mean, did you think that there was some justice meted out there? I mean, there was an assault and the guy goes to jail, yada, yada. Was that a just result?
That's actually a really good question. That's the first time anybody ever asked me my opinion on it. To be honest with you, as a cop, you always say you don't care about the finding. You don't care about what happens in court. You just, you have your duty to act and you act. And I believe that. What I felt bad for Williams, the off-duty cop that was assaulted, was I felt bad for him for two reasons. First of all, the union didn't back him up like they backed the sergeant up. Now, at the end of the day, Williams feeling agitated because this woman that he cared about's house got broken into, that's an emotion you feel as a man. That's not an emotion that you're feeling as a cop. At the end of the day, Williams would have never got to put his hands on him if it wasn't for the sergeant calling the wagon back. Mm-hmm. And I felt like they shared joint responsibility in what happened there. If you listen to statements that the FOP made afterwards, they tried to say, well, the sergeant had no idea what he was going to do and stuff like that, and blah blah blah. And it was like, I felt like they kind of hung one out to dry to be more supportive of the other, and that's how I felt about it. It was justice served. I don't think it's my place to say. But I did feel like one guy got stuck holding the bag a lot more than the other one, because ultimately he couldn't have done it without the other guy's help.
Yeah, but let's also keep it real. As we were talking this through, I realized, my God, if the reverse had happened, the suspect had somehow subdued one of the officers and handcuffed him, and then beat him so badly that he broke his ankle, how many years would that suspect have gotten for that assault?
That's another fair point too.
A lot of years, right? Not 45 days. Let alone the probation the other guy got. All right, so now, at the end of this experience, there's two possible reactions that the other officers can have and the department can have. Hey, Joe, your training, we knew it. You got the commissioner's award. You were trained well, and you did exactly what you were supposed to do. And I mean, as a police officer, you saw a crime, you reported it. If it happened to be other officers, but that's exactly right. Or they can call you a rat and a snitch. Now, which way did it go, Joe?
Well, I will say for the majority, I was called a rat and a snitch. There were a few good people. My old partner, for one, ultimately supported me, always had my back until the end. But a large group of people, and especially in the group of people that worked in the field of narcotics, I was viewed as that rat, that snitch, that person that can't be trusted.
Yeah. And when that happened, how much did you expected? How much were you disappointed or surprised?
I figured that there was going to be somebody that was going to, people were going to say something. I'd be lying to you if I said I wasn't expecting some blowback. But I never, ever, ever anticipated how bad it was, what was going to encompass. I'm talking to you from Florida right now. I would have never bet in a million years, I would have had to move. I would have ultimately been forced out all over this.
So it's funny. You're in some ways, I'm talking to you, and I'm, I guess, biased on your behalf. But you're such a good guy. You were a little naive about it. You thought the other cops would mainly be either ambivalent or on your side. No, they mostly turned against you. Did it ever get to a point where it got a little scary for you?
Oh, I mean, I ended up having to moving. There were two separate times I called for backup, and nobody responded. And that was scary in itself. The day after Thanksgiving, my wife and I came home. There was a dead rat on our windshields. I remember telling my wife that day, right after the cops left and they took a police report, I said, pack your stuff. You're going to your parents' house. And it was kind of felt like I was going into the witness protection program, almost that it was like I had to move right away to kind of protect myself and protect my wife and protect my family.
Now, Joe, I know you say that still you think a majority of cops are good guys and stuff, but to me, an outside, that sounds like you're describing what a gang would do.
So right before the rat was put on my car, I actually go to meet with the then president at the time, Bob Cherry, and I bring him my journal that I kept of all the events and stuff like that, and I'm talking to him, and first thing he tells me, he says, "Oh, I wish you had stopped Gialamas that day." And I looked at him, I said, sir, with all due respect, I said, I didn't even have 2 years on the street by then. I said, I was the most junior person there. If I had known what was going to happen, of course I would have stopped him. So, he basically tells me he doesn't want to talk. He doesn't want me to name specifics. He doesn't want to know about names, or he doesn't want to see my journal. And I'm basically telling him at this point, look, man, I'm in fear for my safety. You need to pull me off the street at this point. He basically tells me the best thing he could do for me is put me in patrol. The reason people are mad at me is because, VSID, which was the name of the unit at the time, and OCD, which was the name before it was called VSID, was blood in and blood out. And that's why people were upset with me. And, when he said that, it was like, I felt like I was on an episode of Gangland, like I couldn't believe, like, this is our union president and this is the terminology he's throwing at me, and we're cops.
Yeah, blood in, blood out, right? And I mean, and then you got, that's exactly what gangs say. You got the Bloods and the Crips here in LA, right? And one is red and one is blue. And in this case, you got the boys in blue, okay? And they got their colors, and then if somebody reports anything, snitch. I mean, the guy that Suge Knight ran over in LA with his car, nearly killed him, killed the other guy, but they don't want to snitch, right? And it's the same terminology. Don't snitch. Don't be a rat. It's amazing. It's amazing. So, and look, Joe, I'm with you. Like when I was growing up, I was worked at a couple of prosecutors' office as summer interns when I was going to law school. I did police ride-alongs. I was a Republican, and I thought, yeah, cops are the good guys. So I remember I had this huge debate with my friend about why would a cop ever plant drugs on anyone or false evidence. That's crazy. They would never do that. Well, I got disabused of that through facts. You got disabused of it on a very, very personal level. So now when people say, hey, there's just a few bad apples and that the critics are overstating the case, doesn't your case show, Joe, that it's not really a few bad apples. It's actually a culture of corruption, at least in terms of covering for each other?
I think you could apply that even to a department like Baltimore. And I mean, like I said, there's still people in Baltimore to this day that are still supportive of me, that I still keep in touch with. When I go up there, I still visit with. So I could see you saying the majority, and I mean, you hear of all the stuff going on in Baltimore. I mean, that's a police department that's in turmoil and in horrible need of, reform and leadership. But I'll say this, I work now at a smaller department, and I haven't had any of those issues. Everybody's aware of it, from my sheriff to my sergeant to the people I work with, and nobody has an issue with it, where I'm at. And so I don't think it's all departments. I think that the departments that, the people that would have those issues with it are the departments that are going to breed corruption, that aren't looking to reform and weed out the bad cops and stuff like that. I think those are the departments and the people that are going to have real issue with it. The people that have real issues with it are the people that have those bad reputations, that have crazy nicknames on the street with people and stuff like that. That's just my personal belief.
Yeah, I mean, just today in the news, Marilyn Mosby indicted yet another Baltimore police officer with attempted murder because, again, they got a guy subdued, and it's a burglary suspect, and Officer Wesley Cagle, I guess, shot him at close range, and he's now being charged with first and second degree murder. So, Joe, you look at all those stories together, and I interviewed Michael A. Wood Jr., who's another former Baltimore police officer, and he talks about what was expected. You go into black neighborhoods and you arrest people. That's what you do, right? And it's hard not to see that as a culture.
Look, first, Mike was my first sergeant I ever worked for. I still consider him a friend. We still talk, we still talk and stuff like that. And he's a super smart guy. And in Baltimore, it's more arrest everybody. They try to justify the crime there by saying, well, yeah, we have 211 homicides this year, but look at how many arrests that we've made this year. So the numbers are just bloviated, basically. I never worked in some of the areas that Mike worked in. The only real areas I've ever worked in were East Baltimore, where Cagle worked at, the officer that just got charged and stuff like that. And that's where I'd met him. And West Baltimore, where Freddie Gray died. So those aren't neighborhoods like, Mike had the opportunity to work in, North and South Baltimore, where they have they're diverse neighborhoods. When I came to work, I didn't have those. East and West Baltimore, for the most part, are just two very, very poor neighborhoods, horribly affected by the drug epidemic, and, in desperate need of help beyond the policing and stuff like that.
So let's talk a little broader, though. Okay, forget about the assaults, the law breaking, the covering for each other. Just put all that stuff aside for a second. How about the us versus them mentality? How much does that get taught versus, or maybe, everybody has different experiences. I mean, Michael Wood says we always felt it was us versus them. It's not like we didn't really have a sense of we're here to help the community. We were here to make arrests, right? What was your perspective on it?
I don't disagree with that perspective whatsoever. That that's kind of how it's taught. We would have a thing. If you ever heard like a cop in distress or something like that. I mean, they put it out, and every cop from every side of town was flying down lights and sirens as fast as they could to get there. So, an us versus them mentality, totally I get. Baltimore, I could tell you firsthand that they are all about arrest. Go out there, lock everybody up. The more arrests you make, the better it is. And, so that all, I think stokes the fire of the us versus them mentality. There is no real policing, or nobody really teaches you anything of, community policing. When I was there, we had a program that we called the Diamond Standard program, where it was for a month long, and you did community meetings. You went to, in the area you policed in, you went and did like team building things with kids from your neighborhood. But the mayor of Baltimore and the new commissioner that you brought in, they got rid of that program, and they never replaced it with anything. So, I mean, they just cared about, like you and Mike are talking about, arrest everybody. And that's another problem too, is that, and this kind of might even lead into the whole Freddie Gray thing to a degree, not knowing all the facts and stuff. But one thing that Baltimore used to do is, you'd have supervisors tell you, well, it doesn't matter if it'll hold up in court. Just make the arrest and let the state's attorney's office throw out the case. And that was something I always thought was horrible leadership.
Right. So, and again, let's put aside race for a second, which we haven't talked much about in this case. But let's do poor and rich neighborhoods. So you say arrest, 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 but you mean in poor neighborhoods. You weren't going to go into rich neighborhoods and arrest everybody, right?
I didn't work in any rich neighborhoods, but I mean, you don't have the same. The way you're kind of taught is that you don't have the same crime in those neighborhoods.
That's what you're taught. That's interesting.
And it's the truth. It's and I watched Mike's interview, what he did with you, and he kind of says it. He came from that Marine background. Trained me and sent me out there. He talked about his military training and stuff that you get trained and you get sent to war that, hey, you might have to kill somebody. Being a cop is really not all that much different. You go to a police academy for a couple of months, you learn a couple of laws, you ride around with somebody else that knows, they teach you how to shoot, they teach you how to drive, and they throw you in these neighborhoods and say, all right, go make arrests, go protect the world. You're that wall. And it's a tough act, man. It's a tough thing to follow if you're not mentally prepared for it. That job as a cop, I always tell people, is more mental than anything else.
Yeah, but you see, that's the thing. I mean, I'd love to talk to, and I'm sure I will at some point, talk to suburban cops. Because my guess is suburban cops aren't told it's you versus them, go arrest everybody, you're the wall, right? No, I'm sure that they're taught, like, if there's outsiders or there's this, there's that, make sure you regulate. But they're not seeing the community as the enemy. They're not, I'd be surprised if they saw, and especially in a well-to-do suburb in Connecticut or something, they're not going to be seen as an occupying force. They're going to be seen as a protecting force of that community. Whereas in Baltimore and other places like that, and it's not just Baltimore, it's all across the country, in inner cities, I don't get the sense that cops are taught you're here to protect this community as opposed to go out and arrest them and occupy them.
I wouldn't disagree with that at all. I mean, I work in a small department now, and it's not the us versus them mentality here. It's about, community police. And I know one thing that was kind of new to me when I came here, they told me, we're about, I think the word they used was customer service policing. And when I heard that, it was like foreign to me. It was like, oh, I never even heard of that. But you learn and you move on, and that kind of just backs up what you were just talking about.
Yeah, let's keep it real. Mainly white, well-to-do communities, we're doing customer service, right? In inner cities, we're occupying. So that's just the reality of life, and that's part of why we have these conversations so we can get to a better place, right? So we can learn from it.
I agree 100%. I think one of the major things in driving forces in it too is, like, for example, again, I always go back to Baltimore because I talk about my, if I'm going to talk, I want to talk about my experience and what I have some knowledge base in. And, like you take Baltimore, for example, they're up to 211 homicides on the year already. 211, and last week they had I think it was like two 17-year-olds and a 19-year-old that were shot and murdered. So I think when you're in an area like that where you have that much violence and that much stuff going on, you have to try something. And if you're doing A and that's not working, you have to be able to adapt and go to option B. And I definitely think that the community policing is something that you can use and can work on.
See, Joe, that's exactly what I'd be thinking, right? So right-wingers look at that and say, okay, well, then you see that we had all that violence, black on black crime, so we should arrest them more. But wait a minute, we already arrest them at unbelievable rates. Apparently that didn't work, right? It didn't keep the crime down. And part of the reason, my guess as to why it doesn't work is because if you were doing real policing, you would have people in the community who would help you because their son got shot or their friend got shot. But none of the people in the community trust the cops, so you never solve any, not never, but you have a harder time solving the cases, which then encourages people to do more shootings because they think they're going to get away with it, and they're probably right.
Well, I mean, you take that and, take a look at what happened with me. Everybody knows it. I can't tell you how many Facebook messages and stuff like that I get from people from Baltimore telling me they wish I'd come back. And one of the things that, look at my situation, everybody knows what happened to me. Now, do you expect somebody that just witnessed a homicide to come forward in Baltimore City and say, hey, I just saw this guy shoot this 17-year-old kid. I want to come forward. I want to testify, when you have a department that treated one of its own, like you would see on TV, like you'd see on The Wire, for reporting one of their officers assaulting a citizen.
Yeah, I mean, look, so they would trust you, but they wouldn't trust the cops and the department that treated you in the way that they did.
Exactly.
Then how are you going to go to that department and think that they're going to have your best interest in mind, that they're going to protect you if you actually give evidence on that guy? I mean, it's hard to believe that, and that's part of the reason why you have the crime epidemic that you do, because although you're arresting people, you're not arresting the right people, right? And
I agree with that 100%.
yeah. Okay, so final thing on that, and again, it goes to the culture. Again, today, randomly in the news, maybe it's not so random because it's constantly in the news, Police Executive Research Forum, which is a group of police officers, research and policy group, and they came out with a study saying that the problem is embedded in the culture that they're using, that the go-to thing is use physical force, that they're not taught to de-escalate as much as they are taught go and control the situation, make sure you have a handle on it, and that's what leads to physical force. And in fact, Joe, before you answer, let me give you some of the interesting numbers that they threw out there. In recruit training, and then I'm curious on your perspective, they said on average they spend 58 hours on training on firearms, 49 hours on defensive tactics, but only 10 hours on communication skills and 8 hours on de-escalation skills.
I mean, those what you just read, I can't argue with it whatsoever. I would assume that, for one, the reason that they give you more training on the gun is because ultimately that's a weapon that could ultimately take somebody's life. I think that you're right and I think we discussed it earlier, that they need to have more training and things of that nature to teach better communication skills and things like that. And I think that they should have more programs in place. One thing that I'm a proponent of, for example, you get a psychological screening to join a police department, but you don't ever get screened any other time. I was involved in a police-involved shooting myself, and my wife had to make me a doctor's appointment to go talk to somebody. The department didn't do that. And I think you should have to go see a psychologist to make sure that, you're not affected by the day in and day out. Not talking about, the uses of force, but, you sometimes respond to a scene, you might see a baby, a dead baby, and that sticks with you for the rest of your life. And I think that's something they need to implement. Another thing, and it kind of piggybacks off the what you just read. I know in the article, the story you did about me when I was supposed to receive an award, and the Huffington Post, came with me, and I was supposed to receive an award, and I was ultimately shunned and not allowed to receive my award like they told me to. Mm-hmm. One of the things I noticed, and I kind of was thinking about this the other day, is most of the people that were getting awards, it was for situations that involved uses of force, tasing, shooting somebody, stuff like that. And I thought to myself, I said, I wonder when the last time a cop was given an award at a ceremony like this for reporting actual police corruption and bettering the department that way. And I think that goes along what you're saying about culture and things like that.
Yeah, and it's a matter of what you emphasize. It's a matter of what you reward and what you punish, right? So you did the right thing. You reported a crime that you saw. It happened to involve officers. You were punished, right? We don't report other officers. We don't. And what does that lead to? That leads to a culture of corruption. It's obvious. And if all you're doing is worrying about defensive tactics and guns, et cetera, and you're giving out awards for physical force, what are you going to get? You're going to get physical force, right? And there's also this element of like, got to be a tough guy, make sure nobody disobeys your orders. How much do they emphasize that in training, by the way? Because it seems to me from the outside world, it seems like the number one thing that they train you guys on is no one is ever allowed to, mouth off to you or anything like that, because then you're going to have chaos. So make sure you clamp on that right away. Am I seeing that wrong from the outside, or is that how they're training?
Well, they kind of teach you, I've heard in different ways, it would be considered what they call like the use of force continuum. You go to step one and you're at step two, you try step three, you go up the chain. And, another avenue I was taught once by an instructor was, ask them, tell them, make them. You ask them to do this, you tell them to do this. If they don't do it, you make them do it. And I agree, we could all definitely use more, training. When I was in the military, we used to learn something called LEAPS. It stood for, listen, emphasize, ask questions, paraphrase, and summarize when talking to somebody. And you know, a lot of times we were able to de-escalate just off of that, but you actually went to training for that. You went to training to learn how to talk to people, how to communicate better. You're doing more role playing of those types of situations and stuff like that. You know, it goes back to what we were saying. It's like, you know, they prepare you for war. They prepare you for, you know, make sure, you know, you could, you know, leap tall buildings and, you know, in a single bound and do all this crazy stuff. But they expect you to kind of come in and know, you know, oh, well, you have good, if you can't get hired without good communication skills. So they don't really sharpen those. They sharpen everything else, but not those.
Yeah. So when you look at all this, I think we can fix it. We have to fix it. And I think that it's mainly in the training and mainly in the culture that we create in policing. So at the end of all this, Joe, you're still a cop. So I assume you haven't given up on it. You still have faith that it's all going to work out and policing is going to get better and that you're going to be a part of that?
I hope so. You know, you know, my mom actually even told me once, she said, you know, you ever, after the whole Baltimore thing, why don't you go back to school and do something else? And I said to her, you know, Ma, I don't know how to do anything else. I've done the military for 6 years. I was a cop for 6 years. I don't know how to do anything else. I still want to be a cop for one reason. I want to help people. And I still think that that's the best chance you have. I think that, you know, the real way you're gonna see change is through leadership. You know, you need, you know, from the top, you know, your mayors, your commissioners, you need those people at the top, you know, setting the example and you know, leading by example and stuff like that. And if you do that, it'll trickle down. And then you go to, you know, you get into your training and stuff like that. Like I said, I know when I first started, we had this training. And when Stephanie Mary Rollins-Blake came in, she axed it and got rid of the training. So there's, like you said, there's definitely things that, you know, we can do. And, you know, I hope to be a part of it. You know, I hope to, you know, be able to still help people and be able to serve, you know, the communities and stuff like that. I mean, besides what happened to me for coming forward, I loved my time in Baltimore. Besides that, I thought it was the best way I got to help people. I felt like I made an impact on people's lives all the time. You know, not arresting everybody, but talking to people, you know, helping people get into programs and stuff like that. I just saw it as the absolute best way to every day impact somebody's life.
All right. Police Officer Joe Crystal, former Baltimore cop Joe Crystal, one of the good guys, clearly trying to do it for all the right reasons. Thank you so much for joining us on the Young Turks. Real learning experience for us. Really, really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. It was my pleasure, and I'm honored to be here. Thank you.